Hi guys, today I'm going to be talking to Julie One. She's a candidate for the 26th Council District that covers Sunnyside, Woodside, Long Island City, and parts of Astoria. Julie, thank you very much for joining me today.
Hi, Christian. It's good to see you again.
Oh, great. So listen, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for, to be the next council member for the 26th District.
Yes. So my name is Julie One, and I'm a city council candidate for District 26. That encompasses Long Island City, Sunnyside, Woodside, and Astoria, which are the neighborhoods that we live in and that we love. Right now, this 2020, as the 2020 year comes to a close and we reflect back, it's been such a hard time for so many people. And it's been especially hard for people who are immigrants, people of color, and low-income families and working families. And that's exactly what has brought me here today. As a child of immigrants, I immigrated here from South Korea in 1998 when I was 8 years old, and seeing how both of my parents, who were small business employees, because small businesses are the lifeline for a lot of working class families like mine, the ways that this COVID-19 has really hit small businesses, it's left them unemployed. And even as a 1.5 generation immigrant who's been able to go through the public education system and so quote unquote achieve the American dream as a digital strategy consultant working for a Fortune 500 company, my salary alone still was not enough to hold my family up, to maintain two living expenses, pay their rents as well as mine. It was just almost impossible. And the first few months of this pandemic were the hardest times that we've had to go through as a family. And that is why I'm running for city council, to make sure that I'm bringing my skills and my lived experiences as a technology change agent to really take a look at the common denominator that connects us all. Even me and you right now, we wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for technology, for Wi-Fi, for our computers, for our devices. And that is why we really need to have diversity in our representation, in our backgrounds, making sure that we have immigrants, working families represented, not as proxies, as someone from afar saying, hey, I really care for working families, but someone that has actually grown up in a working family, that grew up on free lunch in public schools, that really understands what it's like to struggle as well as give back. And it's really important for all of us to really understand how we're going to move forward in this modern day and age where we are now transitioning into a digital economy and a digital world and a digital government. If all of our digital services are offered on the internet, as well as our learning for education, it is vital that we have leaders from the technology sector who have experience, who will be able to lead in a way where traditionally we don't see that often. And we want to make sure that we have that representation this upcoming cycle, and that's what I'm here for. So
Right.
I'm really thankful to be here, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk.
Great. Well, now, Julie, you're pretty active in the community. I've seen you out and about. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing, in the community right now and how long you've lived in the district? Just some sort of background along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've moved back to New York about 4 years ago. But so I've lived in Long Island City, then Dutch Kills, and I currently live in Sunnyside with my husband, who was born and raised in Woodside. And if you think back to like the 70s and 80s, there was a thriving Korean American population here. This is where a lot of the Korean immigrants settled and started their small businesses. And you still see the remnants of that. A lot of small business owners are Korean American. And now you see a huge influx of second generation and 1.5 generation Korean immigrant children and third generation like myself coming back to where our roots are, where our parents have started their businesses and started our lives. And you can still see the Korean awnings in Sunnyside, Woodside, and throughout Long Island City as well. So that's where we've come back. And this is where I've spent a lot of my time with my family growing up. Like a lot of my extended family have worked in Astoria, Sunnyside, Woodside. So this place is truly like home to me. And as you said, I'm a member of the community board too. I was a founding subcommittee member for the technology subcommittee, where you've really seen how we've been able to amp up our digital presence as well as our digital activity as a community board to make sure that it's accessible. And I'm also on the public safety and city services subcommittee as well. And I also serve on the board of 696 Build Queensbridge, also known as Community Capacity Development. It's an anti-gun violence organization that has a proven track record of decreasing gun violence in the NYCHA houses in Queensbridge, Ravenswood, Woodside houses, and so many more throughout Queens. And I also serve on the advisory board of Queens Together, the Restaurant Alliance, especially with my heart for Queens small businesses, and my father-in-law, who's a small business owner for small Korean restaurant in
Hmm.
Queens. That's how I've been serving with them as well. And I've also been serving locally with the mutual aids, Sunnyside, Woodside, Long Island City, and Astoria.
Going back to a bit of history here, that's an indication of how you might think about things. Amazon 2 years
Yeah.
ago, big announcement, big plans. What were your thoughts on this, big project that was proposed there and the proposed 25,000 jobs and things?
Yeah.
Looking back at that, what were your thoughts, and how do you see it today, and what might have been in terms of today?
Sure. The first image that comes to my mind is Valentine's Day. I remember this exact day. I don't personally like Valentine's Day, but that Valentine's Day I will never forget because there was a piñata of Jeff Bezos's head in Diversity Plaza where many people screamed and cheered in the victory that they had won.
Hmm.
And I think it really comes down to inclusive and shared decision making, which we did not have a chance to do from the offset that really rubbed the community members in the wrong way. So
Hmm.
I also oppose the way that it was written, the way that it was handled, Amazon HQ2 deal. Firstly, because of the backroom deal between Cuomo, de Blasio, and Amazon. And it was just an egregious act of corporate welfare. And in addition to that, we do not need to give Amazon $3 billion in subsidies. There are companies like Google and Facebook that came to our city and did this the right way, where they had inclusive community input as well as just outright payments to say,
Hmm.
okay, we want to be a part of the city and we're going to pay for it and we're going to make sure that we do it the right way. And the way that they were doing it, they were trying to bypass community engagement and sidestep the ULURP process. And as a community board member, I do not appreciate that at all. And it would just be I think it would have been the wrong tone and the message for the rest of the country on how New York City does business and how we allow our public land to be.
Put aside the subsidies for one moment, and put aside, I mean, I know it's
Mhm.
hard to, but put aside even the process, with it, because even though it bypassed ULIP, what would you think, though, of all that office space going down there, of the concept of jobs, etc.? Would you be a proponent for that if you separated that from, the subsidies, etc.?
If there was more inclusive shared community input, potentially, but I already know from the conversations that I've had with
Mm.
the tenants associations of NYCHA who were falsely promised 26,000 jobs, which were most likely going to be temporary low wage jobs for residents of our community. And
Hmm.
there was no actual accountability or promise of even having further down the line potential growth for their profession, careers, or entrepreneurship or partnerships. And as someone who really stands for small businesses, we already see the struggles of retail businesses in our community. And having someone like Amazon, who already control 50% of the e-commerce market share, would have made it even more difficult, especially in a time like now. Because what you see right now in Staten Island or anywhere else in Manhattan, you have Amazon now where you're getting deliveries within one day. And if we were to have that here in our district, it would make it even harder for our small businesses, especially during COVID-19, to compete with them because it's a matter of convenience. If our small businesses cannot compete with single day deliveries, there was no way that they would survive this entire pandemic.
Hmm.
And it would also hurt our culture and arts as well, because what we need to do as a community for our small businesses is really hone in on the uniqueness of Sunnyside, the uniqueness and character of Long Island City that we have built, and the beauty of Astoria and Woodside, to say these are the colors and characters of our community and this is what we specialize in. And that's why people from all over the city come to this district to eat, come to this district to shop. And these are the things that we want to incubate and nurture for our retailers, for our arts, for our culture, for our restaurants.
All
And
right.
something like Amazon would have really hurt that.
Right. Now, Julie, what would you like to see there? At the moment, you're talking about 20 acres of sort of barren space. Uh,
Yeah,
what would you,
yeah,
what could you see go there eventually? I mean, the only reason why I bring it up is because it's likely to go through the land use process for the next council,
yes.
and it is a gigantic, area of land.
Hmm.
So what
Hmm.
would you sort of, be looking for if an application came your way?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to note. I know that we just recently had that ordeal with Animal Basin, with your LIC and
Mm,
our LIC.
mm,
Yeah, so I think the most important part, the key takeaway for that piece of land is that it's 3 publicly owned plots of land. And you hear it very often with a lot of the candidates that are running right now saying public land for public use. And especially in a time like now, where a lot of us, especially those who live in Long Island City, in the densest part, where the parks are overcrowded, the public infrastructure is overcrowded, our sewage system is not sufficient, you are going to continue to hear those cries to make sure that we have open spaces and public use, especially when it comes to density and our New York City goals for to meet that need.
mm.
So I think we need to make sure that public assets for community is now more than ever, because it is crucial that we continue to hold on to them and we use them for public benefit, not for profit. So we need to make sure that we publicly fund Wetlands Park, especially because we know that that area is at high risk for flooding. And we always hear the cries of parents for public schools, especially for high school students who don't have enough seats right now, as well as younger students throughout our district. So I think for me, the main takeaway, what I'm going to be looking for in any proposal are 3 things: that it's livable, sustainable, and resilient. And
Hmm.
when I talk about it being livable, I'm simply looking for making sure that there are parks, playgrounds, sports fields, landscaping, schools, libraries, daycare, after school programs, transportation access, community spaces, programs, and spaces for arts and culture. These are the things that we love about Long Island City now, and the things that we love about our community overall that we want to continue to protect, because we all love the same things and we want to protect it as well as build our lives for the future. And
Right.
when we talk about sustainability, we need to make sure that it benefits both existing residents that we have now, who are long-term residents who have lived here and love this place, but also the new residents that have moved here. Whether
Hmm.
they're like me, they've moved back, or they're completely new from out of state or wherever they're from. Whatever the draw was, we want to make sure that it's benefiting both new and existing residents and the businesses, because we talk about how commercial businesses, especially in Long Island City, how there's no small businesses that can really afford those sky high commercial rents.
Mm.
So making sure that in terms of affordability, we're not only talking about affordability for housing, but also for commercial businesses on what that means. Are we only going to have box top big retailers in that part of the town? And if that's what the community wants, then that's fine. But if it's not, how do we make sure that it's affordable for all, especially for smaller retailers? And we want to make sure that we're distributing economic development fairly when it
Mm.
comes to that, like we just talked about, and protecting and restoring our natural environment, because that waterfront is a beautiful space. We want to make sure that we have energy efficient buildings for renewable use of resources. And that's what we're continuing to see and continue to fight for. And lastly, in addition to that, or in
Mm.
very close ties to it, is resilience, like we were talking about flood risks, which we always hear. So making sure that whichever proposal comes in, that they're taking a proactive stance to combat climate change with the sea level rises that are inevitable, making sure that we are ready for increased storms, and community services are going to be tied in for emergency preparedness, and that we have state of the art infrastructure that encourages innovation as well as resilience, which I think we will continue to fight for and have.
Right, and that you're obviously talking about the private land, right here, in terms of what you would
Mhm.
want and develop in
Yeah,
terms of
for the
buildings
proposal itself,
for the
those
private
3 things are what I would look for. Yes.
in a private application. Okay. Um, Sunnyside, it's been quite tough.
Yes.
Sunnyside and the Phipps houses development. It's been somewhat controversial, you could say. Um,
Yeah.
were you a proponent for that plan? I mean, I saw your vote in the community boards that you opposed it, but can you just go into a little bit of detail as to why you opposed the Phipps housing plan on Barnett Avenue?
Yeah, I just want to make it clear, no
Mm,
one on the community board who voted no nobody is against affordable housing.
mm,
And I think if you were on the community board call for that vote, which we still have a recording of, so people can rewatch it, and I could share the link if people are interested, is that you can genuinely feel the emotions of everyone struggling to balance out the need for affordable housing, especially now when evictions are on the rise, but also understanding that when we're dealing with the 11th worst landlord in New York City, that is a very hard threshold to meet for a landlord in New York City. We've got a lot of bad landlords out here. If you're at number 11, almost number 10, that's a really red flag for me to really notice. And also to really hone in on the fact that we need to recognize that all developers, no matter who you are, whether you're doing affordable housing, whether you're a nonprofit organization, no matter who you are, that you have to resolve existing HPD violations before, and all the complaints that you have before you be approved for rezoning, not after. It should not be in retrospect, because what we have right now, that if we continue to move this way, then we reinforce a perverse incentive structure. And that allows notoriously bad landlords like the Phipps to further have opportunities to be negligent. Because if we're already having 400 units that have complaints, who have voiced the last 4 years, they had 4 years to make this right, to make amends with the existing tenants. Are we really willing to put another 150 families who are going to be lower income, be subject to their negligence? Because even this week, we had another bed bug outbreak in this building. And this continues.
So basically,
to
your philosophy is, hey, these guys have got a bad track record. Sorry, your record's so bad that I don't want this to move forward. That's really it, is it not?
Yeah, because I think you need to look at it the same way as a creditor would when you go into a bank to take out a mortgage. As an individual, what they will always do is check your background as well as your credit. And when you don't qualify for those things, no one is really going to stick their neck out and give you a mortgage, because they trust that in goodwill in the future, your behavior will change and your track record doesn't have weight. And I think that really matters, especially as someone who has lived and grown up in a low income household and really understands when your parents are second language speakers, which many families have, even in the existing building right now, that intimidation truly works. With more than 170 evictions that are currently out by the Phipps in New York City this year. And I know that overall, I think they had 1,732 families sued and 71 evictions. So that's a lot of families. And for families like mine, when you have that intimidating notice, because you don't have the legal resources or the language resources, all you do is evacuate, because you're so scared and you don't understand how the legal system is going to work, and you're going to evacuate completely. And you may end up homeless, or you may end up living with family in overcrowding in a smaller space, and it just is not okay. So and I think there's a lot of issues overall, but that's how I ended up voting in that way.
All right, that makes sense. Julie, what's your thoughts on the ULURP process? You know, the whole rezoning process, from certification through to community board review, etc., etc. Do you like that process? Do you approve of that process? Do you think it needs to be changed somewhat? Where do you weigh in
I
on
think
that?
I think the ULURP process, when in its design, in theory, was supposed to become more inclusive and make it more accessible. But we know that in a systemic way, that there are greater challenges to the ULURP process overall, in the ways that it is not inclusive and it is not accessible, and there has to be much more public education on it. Because you and I, as people who are civically engaged, know what ULURP is. But I guarantee you that most of the viewers or most of the people that we meet outside in the streets, when you say ULURP, they're going to be like, you what? They don't know what ULURP stands for. They don't know the processes. They don't understand all the steps. They don't understand the timeline. So I think that first and foremost, what we need to do is have an education around it, especially with language accessibility for different cultures, different heritages, different backgrounds, and different income levels, to really understand how to participate, and two, really making sure that we have an inclusive ULURP process overall. Because even when it came to the Barnett Avenue, what we saw in the flood of comments and emails and messages and context that we were getting, even as a community board or a community board member, is that people were saying, hey, I didn't know that this was happening for Barnett Avenue. Who was going to tell me about it?
Yeah.
Why is this happening right now during the holidays? And how am I supposed to participate? And by the time the public hearing had passed, when people began to organize locally to say, hey, I'm against this or I'm for this, it was a little bit too late, where the community board was going to vote on the Barnett Avenue rezoning before they can make public comment again, because it comes after our voting.
Yeah.
So the little nuances that need to be amended are the ones that we really need to go back to, making sure that we have shared inclusive decision making. to make sure that if we're really going to do community outreach for the low income families or the most marginalized, are they in the room? And are those calls or meetings really accessible? And what kind of outreach have you done to make sure that people can attend or
Okay.
have some sort of way to put input? Because we got Facebook messages, like that's great, but that's not part of the actual testimony process or the public hearing to be documented to have real weight.
No, you did right there. Yeah. Just pivoting a little bit. This year there was a lot of discussion about the police in terms of their budget, in terms of how they conduct themselves. How do you sort of view the NYPD, and are you an advocate for cutting their budgets, changing the way they operate? How do you view that?
So I think the key thing here to really think about is the $9 billion budget deficit that New York City is in overall. So with austerity measures upon us, no matter what, it is going to be an inevitable conversation that we have to have, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement and the police brutality that we have witnessed year after year, where this year was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, that it is inevitable that we need to rethink and re-envision the ways that we see the NYPD budget. So I do agree with the current council member, Jimmy Van Bramer, who have decided to vote against the current $1 billion budget deficit, the budget cut that we had for fiscal year 2021, because at the end of the day, even that was not enough. That was just a shell game that actually did not cut NYPD's true operating budget. But instead, I think that was just smoke screens and mirrors to kind of try to appease the civil unrest that we had. And I think in addition to the 1 billion, we need to cut another additional 1.3 billion. And it's not really about cutting, but it's reallocating. Because at the end of the day, I think it is not acceptable that NYPD's current budget is the 33rd largest military spender in the world. There is no reason for us to have $440 million for invasive surveillance technology use, especially as someone who very much fights for and values privacy, especially when it comes to data and surveillance. For military grade weapons, and the 287 million in terminating abusive officers or cut modified duty, and then 263 million in canceling new cadet classes or freeze all new hires for now, and 219 million for reduced uniformed officers for 2014 levels, and 100 million. And I think we need to have inclusive decision making, and we can go line by line. And what I've been doing for more than a year with 696 Build Queensbridge, who has a proven track record, is that we need to make sure that we focus our energy on making sure that we spend it on crime prevention and crisis management, that we have reallocation and redirecting funding. And I think that's the right language and rhetoric to use so that we can really wrap our heads around what we're trying to do here when it comes to public safety, so that community organizations that we trust, like 696 Build Queensbridge, who has been successful in cutting down violence, especially gun violence, without any weapons, when they show up, and I really hope that we can capture some of the work that they do, because when our team shows up during a shooting, when the NYPD calls 696 Build Queensbridge and says, hey, there's a shooting in Woodside and we need you to come here and de-escalate. They don't come with military grade weapons. They don't come with vests that protect them, bulletproof vests. They don't come with any sort of guns or helmets. They show up barehanded, nothing to protect them, but it's truly just the restorative justice model, cure violence models that they have been trained in and that they have learned as. And a lot of these folks are formerly incarcerated men who have turned their lives around, who can go in and say, hey, I see you and I know what has happened and this is what we're going to do to de-escalate this. And they're able to do that without any weapons. And they don't stop there. They just continue in a holistic approach to really rebuild the lives of the communities, from mental health to entrepreneurship, job growth, youth building, and so forth, to really holistically rebuild the community that has been suffering under systemic violence and injustices, to really help them understand the root of the causes of the violence that is happening in the community directly. And I think when we go back, like, I know that we talk about old school blocks. Like, if you were in the Big Six Towers, you know that your neighbor who has been gardening in that same garden every single day, everybody knows that grandma, and she will she will whoop you and call your mom and say, you should not be stealing from the store, or you better not be robbing this lady on the block. And that's the same concept that they continue to scale citywide, where they have trusted community leaders who can stop violence from community relationships, as well as their knowledge and restorative justice and cure violence models and de-escalation, instead of resorting to guns and violence to
Okay.
stop violence.
Hmm. Okay, moving on to a different topic, Julie, is with community boards. Obviously, you're serving on community board too. I think you've been there a year or so. How would you go about changing community boards, maybe in terms of making them more efficient, and also how would you look at appointing members should you be the next council member?
Yeah, I think what we can celebrate for this year is that we've had the greatest number of engagement for all community boards citywide since we've gone online. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you could be
Mm,
working a night shift, or you might not have childcare, but you can still dial in on your phone or on your computer and listen in.
mm,
And I think that's something that we need to celebrate. And that's why I'm a proud member of the community board, especially in the tech committee, making sure that we're making this accessible to as many people as possible. But that also alludes to a different problem of making sure that everyone has free Wi-Fi access, broadband internet, and devices. But aside from that, I think we've made great progress in
mm.
a way that we weren't expecting to by making them online. So I think this is something that we should always keep. And there's nothing that can replace in-person to in-person contact, because I do miss sitting in Sunnyside Community Center and having the camaraderie, being able to see people face to face and saying hi to Zarina and Sheila and everybody else, and being able to give people warm hugs. But I don't think that we should lose making sure that we have Facebook Live or having it on Zoom or WebEx, so that, especially for public hearings, those who cannot physically attend, that it is accessible to all.
Right.
And so I think increased engagement has been great, but like you said, I think there's still room for growth. So we want to make sure, especially as a tech subcommittee, that we continue to make sure that we raise awareness and making the calendar accessible for all. Because right now the websites for community boards are not user friendly, and you can tell that it is not. Anyone who's visited it, it's hard to find information, it's clunky. So we wanted to revamp the website overall, and also make sure that we're advertising with local newspapers like Sunnyside Post, and making sure that we're advertising on Facebook, on Twitter, and making sure that we have community contacts, so that we're covering as many people as possible by also reaching out to local newspapers that are in different languages, to make sure that we're reaching the Tibetan community, the Latin American community, and
Mm,
so forth.
mm,
So we also, and I think when it comes to that also, what we need to do for the next, as the next council member comes in, really think about what it means to have a shared inclusive decision making model, even for electing or nominating community board members. Currently, with only the borough president and the council member at being the only ones who have the power to say, okay, I want this person to be on the community board or this person not.
mm.
I don't think that's a very democratic process. I know people who've applied 3 to 6 times and they're still waiting to get on the board, and you hear it all the time. I
Mm,
know some people who are like, how do I get on the board? And people don't realize. So
mm,
I think what we could consider doing is partnering with local organizations like Sunnyside Community Center, 696 Build Queensbridge, and so forth, Woodside on the Move, and making sure that we have community board in partnership with the community-based organizations who really have been on the ground, who have deep roots in the community, especially when it comes to solving real community issues, to ask them to weigh in on the nominations that we have and the applicants that we have. So that way we have more weight in those who are involved on the ground to make recommendations to the borough president and the council member, instead of just them and their team having a say in that. I think that will make it more inclusive and accessible, especially when we include organizations like Chaya or the Arab Family Center, so that we have more diversity
mm.
as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, prior to COVID, there's been a shortage of school seats in the 26th council district. Obviously, with all the building going
Yes.
on in Long Island City and Astoria, especially, families have struggled to get space for their kids. Any thoughts on how a council member could go about trying to get space, or any approach that could be adopted to bring additional schools to the district?
Yeah, I think what we've seen,
Mm,
I mean, it's just been so frustrating, but also I know that remote learning is extremely frustrating for parents, and it can
mm,
be extremely frustrating, especially when you don't have language access or digital literacy. It's not easy for a parent who is working full time, maybe working 3 jobs, working 2 jobs, to also be able to manage their child's school schedule and also be able to go on Google, like on Google's learning apps and be able
mm.
to maneuver everything all at once. So, with that said, I understand the frustrations of that, but again, it's also brought more accessibility to those who could not have physical seats. And I think one way we can combat that is making sure that we use public land for public good, like we talked about, like the site that Amazon was supposed to come in. I
Mm.
think there is room there that we can repurpose to make sure that we have a new middle school or high school, as well as community, making sure that we're investing in existing community centers and building more community centers, especially for parents who work essential jobs or those who can't be at home to advise their children, that we have a space, even if we are still doing remote learning for the next year, that there is a space that children can go to safely social distance and learn, and potentially investing also in resources for education so that those teachers can be present as well.
Okay.
And I think even for existing schools, there's not enough funding. So making sure, and that it just comes back to what we were saying about the $9 billion budget. The reason why we would cut from or reallocate funding from NYPD is not because of whatever reasons people might scream and shout about, but when we have no other choice, we want to protect funding from health. We want to protect funding from education. And therefore, we need to deprioritize certain things that do not need to be spent on, like military grade weapons, so that we can have more funding for education in schools.
All right. Okay. Julie, I'm going to just to finish up, I'm just going to go talk about a topic that came up yesterday from the mayor. He talked about the repurposing of streets in
Mm-hmm.
2020. He talked about, I think 28 miles of protected bike lanes. He talked about
Mm-hmm.
restaurants, the open streets phenomenon of, um, using the streets for that purpose, etc. What is your view on the protected bike lane network and building it, etc.? Do you think it's a good idea? What streets would you like to see these lanes go down on in the district? Can you sort of talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So, as someone who has never owned a car, which you see a lot, especially in our district, where
Hmm.
you see a lot of young people riding their bicycles, it's mainly because it's their primary mode of transportation, because not everybody can afford to have a car and the car insurance and afford parking in this neighborhood.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that I'm against driving. Like my husband is a car fanatic. He loves cars, but I'm a bike fanatic. I love bikes. And so I
Mm.
see both sides and I understand the importance of both, especially if you have a family. But
Yeah.
I do think that with climate change among us and the need for bicycle and alternative modes of transport for environmental justice, as well as just having different modes of transportation, is very, very important. Because there are places that I can get to faster than you can get to in a car. For
Mm.
example, going to Brooklyn. And there are so many cases like that where it's faster for me to bike somewhere than for my husband to drive somewhere, even though he doesn't have a car right now. So I think that's a really important part. And that's why when I think about bike lanes, we have had expansion of bike lanes and it's been great. But I do think it comes back to the same point of making sure that we have shared inclusive decision making, whether it's open streets or bike lanes, making sure that we're truly surveying the community to hear about which streets make sense for you to have an open street, especially when it comes to making sure that we're increasing foot traffic in a time like now so that we can support our small businesses and increasing outdoor spaces for restaurants so that they can have outdoor dining. Because it's not standardized and it is not always fair, where some restaurants may not be able to have outdoor dining
Mm.
if they have a fire hydrant or a bus stop in front of their restaurant. They won't, it's not fair for them. So making sure that we have inclusive decision making processes to make sure that we have a true way of getting input from everybody, to business owners and residents alike, to say this is where it makes sense for us to have bike lanes, and this is where it makes sense for us to have open streets. And when it comes to making sure where we're building bike lanes, I think the most important part for me as a daily commuter who's a cyclist is making sure that we have access to the bridges. So the one that I really have my heart set on is the Queensboro Bridge. I genuinely appreciate the new Crescent Street bike lanes that have come in, as well as 39th Avenue and Skillman and Queens Boulevard and Vernon Boulevard that help us go through the Queensboro Bridge.
Mm.
And the ways that we can improve that even more is making sure that we have the southern outer roadway turned into a pedestrian lane so that the bike lane and the alternative modes of transport like scooters and everything else that's going on there, that everybody can safely social distance and be safe.
It
And I
is
think that
tight
also,
on that roadway. Tight. I was there the other
mhm,
day. Mm,
yeah,
mm,
yeah, we want to make sure it's safe.
mm.
And that also goes to making sure that we have safe bike lanes that allow you to get to Pulaski Bridge, Greenpoint Avenue Bridge, Kosciuszko Bridge. Because when you allow people to have alternative modes of transport, it's actually beneficial not just for the environment, but for also the people on the road. You will feel safer as a driver that there isn't a cyclist like on the road and you're about to hit them and they're not going fast enough and you get frustrated. So you want to protect the bicyclists as well as the drivers. And when you have more people who are opting out for alternative modes of transport like cycling, then it actually helps with congestion as well. So there
Right.
will be less traffic for the drivers and easier ways to get around for cyclists who choose to do so for their values and their reasons.
Okay. Now, Julie, in terms of other transportation issues, bus lanes, other potential ways to help people get around, any thoughts on how that could be expanded or tweaked to
Yeah.
help people in the district?
One other thing I wanted to add is that
Mm,
for bike lanes, we really need to have protected bike lanes.
mm,
Currently, we had more than 200 deaths in our city alone this year alone from bike lanes. So we really have to make sure that where we can have it, if there's enough space, that there are jersey barriers. And with protected bike lanes, we make sure that it's painted more than just green. And if not, some of them aren't painted at all, that we do make sure that it's painted in a way that it's easier for drivers to see. And for us in Western Queens, I think we are very fortunate where we have the most transit rich part of Queens, where
mm.
we have the subway, the Long Island Railroad, the ferries, and everything in between. But I think it can be improved. And the first thing that comes to my heart is ADA accessibility. Because whenever I walk down on for the sunny side, for our subway, we can't, if you're in a wheelchair, like for example, if I was with my aunt who is ADA and she can't walk, how would I get her onto the subway to go home?
Mm.
So making sure that we really have that lens in mind of thinking who is vulnerable and what needs to be improved, I think is number one. And number two, I think overall, I think people are feeling the fears of the MTA not getting enough use. It went from a year ago, all we were talking about was overcrowding on the 7 train, which is probably going to be still true once people start to use the subway again, but also just making sure that we're keeping it alive
Mm.
because 7 and R trains are consistently under maintained as well. So making sure that we have vital upgrades and repairs for those two main lines and making sure that we have ADA accessibility with elevators. And I think overall, I think it just comes down to making sure that we have protected bike lanes, a connected network of bike lanes, because it doesn't make sense for us to have bike lanes everywhere all the time.
Mm.
And I understand the frustrations of that. So making sure that we have shared and inclusive decision making on how we want to design the bikeways so that it's a comprehensive plan throughout Queens that connects us to Manhattan and to Brooklyn and the other boroughs, not just sparse wherever for some odd reason that DOT decides to paint the road green, that it turns green, and making sure that we have accessibility for everybody for public transit as well as alternative modes of transit.
Okay, Julie. Now, is there any other topic you'd like to sort of bring up just to finish up that is important to you? But I mean, you mentioned small businesses. Is there anything else that you'd like people to know? Hey, this is what Julie One thinks is really important. Um,
Yeah,
mm,
I think the number one thing for small businesses is that a team of local residents in
mm,
Sunnyside and Long Island City, we've teamed up together in something called Queen Small Business Alliance,
mhm,
where we put together a technology toolkit. We've been able to put together a toolkit to help you build your own website, as well as access funding in case you cannot afford to have your own domain and pay for building a website, as well as understanding and running your own social media and marketing so that as small businesses that are traditionally brick and mortar and now right now with this economy where they have less resources to have employees, that they're able to juggle it all and transition into a hybrid model for
mhm.
their business to be e-commerce or fully online or both, that we're here to assist you. And we're holding office hours as well. There's a Google form that goes with it so that you can contact us and we can figure out the best way for us to assist you. So think of it like a mutual aid, but with technology for small businesses. Because it was an idea that we got from helping out with small businesses and mutual aids and seeing that there's a gap for that. And then another thing that I'll be fighting for is free high-speed internet. I think in a time like now, especially when it comes to public hearings for the city, planning commission, or even for a community board, we talked about accessibility, but then I always think about those 1 million New Yorkers who don't have access to high-speed internet at all. And that's why we need to make sure that we highlight community leaders like April Andrews, who currently works for Queensbridge Connected, which is the first NYCHA free Wi-Fi program that we had in New York City, where everyone has access to free high-speed internet. And I think in a time like now, if you don't have access to internet, you're going to be missing out a lot no matter who you are, whether you're a student participating in remote learning, or you're unemployed who should be able to look for a job, but you can't access a cafe like you would normally squat in a Starbucks or go to a public library. We can't do that anymore either. Or you're trying to access government services, whether you're trying to apply for your unemployment benefits, you're trying to apply for HRA because you're on the brink of eviction, whatever else it is, all the government agencies are for now not really meeting with you in person like they used to, even the DMV. Okay. So it's really important that we have digital access to government services. So we need to have free Wi-Fi for all. And there are current programs like New York City Mesh that we need to amplify and really make sure that we think about this issue, because digital literacy and digital accessibility is a matter of equity now. And it's no longer a luxury for you to have high-speed internet. It's a matter of digital survival in this digital economy and digital education space and the ways that we're moving towards today.
All right. Well, Julie, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to see you on the internet, and I look forward to staying connected with you.